So today our topic is the rewards and recognition system in the context of open science. But before we start with the actual presentation, I would like to do a quick poll. So please go to menti.com and use the code 76769659. There you will answer two questions. The first one is, which indicators are usually used to evaluate the quality of a researcher? You will be allowed to enter up to 3 answers. I will give you some time now to do that. So the first answers are coming in. So what do we see so far? We have 3 out of 4 answers coming in. So now the answers are coming great. So we have publications, we have awards, we have the number of papers, number of PhD students, I guess. Age index is mentioned 2 times. Grants, the number of papers. We have the acquisition of grants, openness to new ideas, citations, international network, projects, the importance of the topic, student evaluations, so this is referring to teaching. So apparently the publications, the awards, grants, age index are very important. All right, I think there are no more questions coming, answers coming in. Thank you for that so far. I have a second question, which is, which indicators are usually used to evaluate the quality of a scientific article? So again, you will have 3 options. And for that, we also have answers already. So it's again, the number of citations is apparently a big and often mentioned answer. We have the journals, which apparently are important. Reproducibility, nice to see that. Societal relevance. I think the answers are mixed from the 2 questions. Is that possible? Yeah.
Indeed, when I visited for the first time, it gave me the question for the scientific paper and not for the research one. researcher one.
Okay.
Maybe there is something mixed up. I don't know.
Yeah, apparently there's a little issue with my setup of the questionnaire. Anyway, still we can look at what is important if we evaluate researchers or scientific articles. So apparently there are quite a few metrics like the journal impact factor, journals, H-index, the number of publications, number of grants. So we see quite a lot of numbers, citations and all that stuff. And journal ranking, journal impact factor. So what we could see in the two word clouds is that we see a couple of citation-based quantitative metrics. And two of the most popular bibliometric indicators are the journal impact factor and the H-index. The journal impact factor is the mean citation rate of all articles contained in a journal. Originally, it was used as an indicator for the influence of journals, which can help libraries to decide from which journals to collect papers. This is also why many regard it as a quality criterion for journals and why many journals use it as advertisement. And this is, as it is often used as a key criterion to evaluate individual. It is also often used as a key criterion to evaluate individual scientists and research groups, for example, when it comes to hiring, promotion, and tenure. Another popular metric is the H-index, which is the number of papers co-authored by the investigator with at least H citations each. It is often used to measure the success of researchers, for example, when it comes to applying for funding or research positions. Such metrics are very easy to calculate and the result is always a number. This makes it very easy and also very tempting to use these numbers for a ranking, for example, to tell which researcher is better or which article is of higher quality. As I said at the beginning, these indicators are based on citations. So maybe it's worthwhile to take a brief look at these citations. If you want to read a very good paper about citations, I strongly recommend this one. For example, the authors summarize some of the reasons for why authors actually cite other publications. There are some positive reasons, such as for providing background reading, for identifying the used methodology, for paying homage to others who did great groundwork, for identifying original publications upon which the current work is based, and for giving credit for related work and to put the own work into a broader context. But there are also rather negative reasons for citing someone else's paper. For instance, to criticize the cited work, to correct the cited work, to disclaim it, or to dispute the claims made in the cited paper. So, citing someone else's work can mean that you refute the work, that you take note of it, that you reviewed the work, that you applied it, or that you support what is written in the article. Of course, these aspects are part of the scientific process, but you can see that there are quite different reasons for why researchers cite each other's papers. But all these reasons are reflected in the same number, which is the number of citations. Still, citations are used to calculate citation-based metrics, such as the journal impact factor and the H-index. And these citations and metrics are used to assess the quality of researchers and research articles. For these reasons, the authors check to which extent citations are actually an indicator for quality. They did so by using 4 dimensions of research quality. First of all, research is solid and plausible if the research is based on evidence and scientifically sound. Research is original and novel if it provides new knowledge. Scientific value indicates whether the research is of importance for other researchers. And finally, research is of good quality if it has importance for society. The question now is, to which degree do citations relate to these dimensions of quality? Regarding solidity and plausibility, the assumption is that authors only cite papers that are solid and plausible. But as we have seen on the previous slide, the citation behavior can be based on very different reasons. And even the positive citation motivations not all mean that the cited work is solid and plausible. So we cannot conclude that citations are a valid indicator for the solidity of the cited publication. Regarding originality and novelty, the assumption is that research papers with high originality and novelty are much cited. But how about review papers? I actually like review papers a lot, but to be honest, they don't have much originality, but are still cited frequently. This means that we cannot conclude that high citations are an indicator for originality and novelty. Regarding scientific value in the sense of impact, the assumption is that often cited papers are more useful than hardly cited papers. This might be correct, since high citations can indicate high visibility. But articles published by more recognized scientists gain more citations than papers published by less known researchers, disregarding of the scientific value. However, this is another issue that does not reduce the impact of an often cited article. So, despite some limitations, this assumption is probably correct. Finally, it is assumed that articles that are of high importance for society gain more attention and thus more citations. However, academic search engines only take into account scientific output and not, for example, articles in newspapers or in media. Moreover, an article can have a great impact on a local scale, but not on an international scale, which can lead to less attention in international academic journals. So we can confirm this assumption. To sum up, from the 4 dimensions, only one can be evaluated using citations. So if citations are not a good indicator to evaluate research, isn't it a problem that we are using citation-based metrics? Per-Seglen argued already in 1997 that the impact factor should not be used for evaluating research. So it is apparently not a very new discussion. A few years ago, in 2016, Nature stated in an editorial that it is time to remodel the journal impact factor. Others used some more martial words and speak about the slavery of the H-index as a means to measure the unmeasurable. And even the developer of the H-index, George Hirsch, stated that the H-index can fail spectacularly and have severe unintended negative consequences. So apparently there are quite a few who argue for halting the H-index. But this is not just a bottom-up development. So it's not just some individual researchers or some bottom-up initiatives that talk about it. Even publishers and nationwide initiatives refute these metrics. For example, the large publisher, PLOS ONE, so the Public Library of Science, does not promote the impact factor anymore as an indicator for assessing the performance of individual articles. And also the principles underlying the Plan S initiative require to stop using the impact factor. Plan S is, by the way, the nationwide initiative for 100% open access in the Netherlands. As you might know, there is also a shaping expert group at the UT working towards a better rewards and recognition system. They released a set of principles for recognition and rewards. The 4th principle states, assessment and evaluation of individual and team performance as part of a work management should take a qualitative, interpretive evaluation into account, where quantitative metrics play a role. And also the strategy evaluation protocol writes, the research unit should take into account that it is not allowed to use the journal impact factor in a SAP evaluation. The journal impact factor was not created as a measure of the scientific quality of research in an article. It has a number of well-documented deficiencies as a tool for research assessment. So we already spoke about the deficiencies of citations, but there are some issues with the bibliometrics as well. Let's start with the H-index. There are a couple of limitations, and just to name a few. So, for example, due to the focus on the number of papers and the number of citations, the H-index does not incentivize other scholarly activities, for example, education, sharing materials, and public outreach. The H-index also correlates with age, making it impossible to compare researchers in different career stages. For example, senior researchers who will naturally have a higher H-index than early career researchers. It somehow also incentivizes publishing in high-impact journals, which allows these journals to charge very high article processing charges. We have seen this development at Nature, which charges almost $10,000 for an open access article. I think it's $9,500. The metrics also do not take into account the different citation cultures in different scientific fields. There is a so-called field-weighted impact factor, but it only solves the discipline-specific differences, not the other issues. As you know, a paper can have several authors, but the H-index does not differentiate between first and last co-authorships. These metrics do also not take into account data and software citations. I have to admit that citing data and software is generally uncommon, but also alternative metrics like downloads, views, and reuses are not considered, although these metrics would also show some sort of impact. Coming back again to Hirsch, so George Hirsch, the inventor of the H-index, he said that if you make decisions just based on someone's H-index, you can end up hiring the wrong person or denying a grant to someone who is much more likely to do something important. It has to be used carefully. What about a journal impact factor? One of the major problems is that it correlates poorly with actual citations of individual articles. This means that the journal impact factor does not tell much about how many citations a paper might get. And this is actually an intuitive conclusion. Why should the other papers influence the number of citations of a new article? Instead, the journal impact factor conceals the difference in article citation rates. One study found out that the most cited 15% of the articles account for 50% of the citations. And the most cited 50% of the articles account for 90% of the citations. Another issue is that review articles are heavily cited and inflate the journal impact factor. So if you are having a journal and if you want to make your journal impact factor grow, just publish some review articles. As already mentioned, the journal impact factor depends on the research field and citation culture of a discipline. The final issue listed here is that databases can have an English language bias. If you remember the open science definition I presented in our first meeting, diversity was an important issue, including the diversity of languages. So if you want to increase the diversity in research, this would also rather speak against the journal impact factor. But these are not the only metrics. There are several more, and I found this very nice tool called Metrics Toolkit. For a number of metrics, the website summarizes what the corresponding metric means, how it is calculated, which use cases are appropriate and which are not, and also some limitations. What we see here on the right is a screenshot of the information you get for the journal impact factor. The appropriate use case would be a comparison of the influence of a journal, which can help libraries to decide from which journals to collect papers. In contrast, an inappropriate use case would be to use the journal impact factor as an indicator for the quality or impact of an article or researcher. Okay, so this was my little rant on citation-based metrics, but let's try to be a bit more constructive. Are there any alternatives to these metrics? Unfortunately, yes, there are. For example, the Lindau guidelines are comprised of 10 goals in which open science is a recurring element. The Hong Kong principles are a set of 5 principles, including responsible research practices, transparent reporting, open science, diversity of research, and the recognition of all contributions to research and scholarly activity. The Leiden Manifesto provides a guide for research evaluation, as does the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, in short, DORA. Let's take a closer look at DORA. DORA provides a set of 18 recommendations considering the need to assess research based on the content rather than bibliometric proxies. They do consider different stakeholders, but start with a general recommendation, which is to stop using journal-based metrics such as the journal impact factor as a surrogate measure of the quality of individual research articles to assess an individual scientist's contributions or in hiring, promotion, or funding decisions. But they also address different stakeholders, such as funders, who should, for the purpose of research assessment, consider the value and impact of all research outputs, including data sets and software, in addition to research publications, and consider a broad range of impact measures, including qualitative indicators of research impact, such as influence on policy and practice. Or institutions, who should be explicit about the criteria used to reach hiring, tenure, and promotion decisions, clearly highlighting, especially for early stage investigators, that the scientific content of a paper is much more important than publication metrics or the identity of the journal in which it was published. Or publishers, who are asked to greatly reduce emphasis on journal impact factor as a promotional tool, ideally by ceasing to promote the impact factor or by presenting the metric in the context of a variety of journal-based metrics. Or researchers, who should challenge research assessment practices that rely inappropriately on journal impact factors and promote and teach best practice that focuses on the value and influence of specific research outputs. That sounds pretty good in theory, but how can DORA be realized? One way is to use narrative CVs, like this resume for researchers provided by the Royal Society. It starts with some personal details, qualifications, and relevant positions. This is followed by 4 modules. The first one asks how you have contributed to the generation of knowledge, for example, in the form of research outputs like papers, data, and software or grant proposals. The second one asks how you have contributed to the development of individuals, for example, teaching, supervision of students and PhD candidates, or support for colleagues. The third module is about how you have contributed to a wider research community, such as memberships in committees or the organization of research events. Finally, the narrative CV asks how you have contributed to broader society, for example, by an engagement with the broader public or providing information through press and media. Also, NWO implemented DORA using narrative CVs. In their case, the CVs are composed of 2 components, the academic profile and key outputs. Applicants are asked to explain, for example, their motivation to do research, the societal potential of their work, or contributions to open science and education. An often mentioned advantage of such CVs is that the focus shifts from the scientific paper to other academic activities, like data, software, education, and societal engagement. On the other hand, often mentioned critiques is that narrative CVs take more time to read and evaluate, and that it relies more on the interpretation of the evaluator. By the way, you can also sign the DORA declaration and thereby show your endorsement. All you need to do is to fill in some of the personal details, and that's it. There are already a few from the UT who signed the declaration. So if you like what they suggest, don't hesitate to sign. You can sign as an individual or on behalf of an organization. Even some of the major publishers signed DORA already, but what does it actually mean to sign DORA? Are you in charge for something? Can you be held accountable? Can anyone even sue you if you don't adhere to the DORA principles, although you signed them? Well, all you have to expect is a damaged image. But other than that, you don't have to fear more. As the recent case at the University of Liverpool showed, they wanted to cut 32 positions and based the decision upon criteria that are not in line with DORA, although they signed it. This situation is being watched by academics around the world and raised quite some discussion, as this Nature article shows. So you have to expect some kind of a damaged image, but it's not possible to sue you for that. Anyway, it seems like there is some kind of a trend to refute the journal impact factor and move towards other evaluation frameworks like DORA. You might have heard of Open Research Europe. Open Research Europe is an open access publishing platform provided by the European Union for the publication of research stemming from Horizon funding. It is a fully functioning publishing platform where you can submit and publish peer-reviewed scientific articles. And they also do not provide a journal impact factor. The Utrecht University formally abandoned the impact factor in hiring and promotion decisions. What was their rationale for that? Paul Bossely, who is in charge for the Rewards and Recognition program at the Utrecht University, stated, "Impact factors don't really reflect the quality of an academic. We have a strong belief that something has to change, and abandoning the impact factor is one of those changes. Citation-based metrics, such as the journal impact factor and H-index, contribute to a productification of science. This productification can make the amount of output more important than quality. Instead, the Utrecht University will start evaluating academics based on teamwork and open science, including open access, open data, public engagement, which is more in line with DORA. However, applying the new rewards and recognition system will be difficult, since each department will need to design its own process to evaluate a researcher's contribution. Also, if researchers apply for a job at a university that sticks to traditional metrics, they might have a competitive disadvantage. The decision to abandon the impact factor raised quite some discussion. A group of 171 researchers, including 142 professors, warned in an open letter that the new rewards and recognition system by the Utrecht University will harm Dutch science. But we heard so many arguments that speak against the H-index and the journal impact factor. So what's their point? In a nutshell, they say that the change involves several problems. First, it is no longer clear how scientists are judged, if not by impact factors. They say there will be more arbitrariness and less quality. Also, the change affects international recognition of Dutch scientists. They argue that there are negative consequences, particularly for early career researchers, because they cannot compete internationally, for example, if other universities rely on traditional metrics. Finally, as I mentioned before, narrative CVs make assessment difficult and subjective. They also say that it is some sort of a misconception that the journal impact factor does not tell much about quality. They argue it does stand for quality because the average Nature and Science paper is based on more work than the papers published in other journals. I personally would doubt that, but this is what they are saying. In addition, the journals also consult top experts, which ensure high impact and quality. I think also the other journals have quite good experts. So they didn't have to wait long for a response. 2 open letters were published and signed by other scientists who do not agree with the 171 and endorse the decision made by the Utrecht University. For example, they question the current status quo in which science comes before everything else, and they also challenge the mentality that good researchers need to sacrifice themselves. This creates a conflict with mental health, as well as care responsibilities, of which, by the way, many are done by women. They also don't agree regarding the misconception of citation-based metrics and that it can be used as a proxy for quality. Instead, they insist that the journal impact factor does not say much about the quality of a researcher or an article. Another criticism is that the new rewards and recognition system jeopardizes the top position of Dutch science. This is also rather questionable, since as we have seen before, international funders and publishers refute the journal impact factor and instead endorse the new system around DORA. But we have also seen that endorsing DORA does not always mean a lot. However, they do recognize that not everything of the old way needs to be abandoned. Of course, the scientific article still matters, but it is not the only relevant output. The change from quantitative evaluation practices to a more qualitative approach certainly takes time, and reviewers would need some kind of training for evaluating narrative CVs. So, to sum up, the evaluation of researchers in articles is often based on citations and citation-based metrics. Citations can have very different positive and negative reasons and do not always indicate quality. Still, the citations are the basis for many evaluation metrics, and these evaluation metrics are often used to evaluate researchers in research articles. But there seems to be a trend towards abandoning the journal impact factor and moving towards alternatives such as DORA, the Hong Kong Principles, the Leiden Manifesto, and the Lindau Guidelines. However, the scientific community is a bit divided into proponents and opponents. And with that, I would like to finish this presentation and give the floor to you. I would like to know from you, what is your view on that topic? But before, I would like to stop the recording.